Pokemon Unbound is one of the most popular ROM hacks ever made, and I'm gonna try to beat it on expert mode with completely randomized encounters. This means that I could get something utterly game-breaking, or the most useless Pokemon you can possibly imagine. On top of that, I'll be adhering to Hardcore Nuzlocke rules, which means any of my random Pokemon that faint will have to be boxed and never used again. And losing any battle means going back to the very start of the game. Listen, one of the most exciting parts of any randomizer is choosing your starter, and it's gonna be pretty hard to beat Unbound's default selection of pseudos. Yeah, I wouldn't say Igglybuff is exactly a better option. Our second choice, Butterfree, is pretty good early game, but still not a better option than a pseudo legendary. Come on, we're gonna need something good here. Now that's more like it. Solgaleo is of course an incredible starter to get, especially with multi-scale as its ability. I've never used one of these since there's no base Nuzlocke that gives you one, and you never see it in VGC since it's probably the worst restricted legendary. I next leave my hometown to hopefully pick up another epic encounter on Route 1. It's not exactly a legendary, but I can still work with Skitty. Never mind. Slow start Skitty seriously has to be right down there with the worst possible combinations we could get. So make our way to Route 2, we've got to get through Icicle Cave where I find Tyrantrum. I definitely don't mind seeing my favorite fossil Pokemon here, even if the next gym is full of fairy types. At least with Pixelate, Rex will fit right in. Before challenging the Dresco Town gym, we still have 3 encounters to pick up to fill out our team, starting with Raichu on Route 2. Magician would be a much more useful ability if we actually got to keep stolen items after battles. We're still able to remove opposing items with it, so it's not entirely useless. Our encounter on Route 3 is a lot less exciting, but if we can keep Tangela alive until it evolves, it could be a major asset to the team. Our final encounter before the first gym ends up being an Escavalier in the Flower Paradise. An Escavalier with Flash Fire turns its only weakness and quad weakness into an immunity. This is basically the best ability we could have gotten on this thing. But come on, seriously, a timid nature? Losing 10% of our great attack stat is a pretty steep cost for a 10% increase in speed. If we're adding 10% to 0, it isn't exactly helpful. Battling the first gym leader, Mearskull, is a little bit like hanging out with the type of person he is. You're constantly shrouded by a thick fog that seemingly makes it impossible to do anything productive. Now trust me when I say expert mode gets out of hand extremely fast with the difficult fights. But in the case of this first gym fight, we're severely overprepared with our 2 best Pokemon being overtuned steel types. But what did you expect? It's a Solgaleo fighting a Weedle. We do, however, learn something extremely important that'll affect the rest of the run. The opposing trainers still have their default teams. That's what's going to make expert mode so extremely difficult, but they are still affected by the ability randomizer, which could lead to some unexpected outcomes. As for the fight itself, the insufferable missing and being put to sleep eventually ends. After Mearskull's defeated, he gives us a felony's worth of leaf badge to be in our possession before we head to the Grim Woods. In the woods, our random encounter ends up being a Chatot, which I don't really mind since for some reason, it's one of my favorite Pokemon. Although I'm not exactly sure if this Pokemon is even capable of having a quiet nature. Aerialate's pretty neat though. On Route 4, I find a Trico, which is as good a time as any to tell you why there's a little Pokeball next to any Pokemon we run into. This is because we're in sandbox mode, which makes it so you can use every HM as soon as they're available without teaching them to your Pokemon. Sandbox mode also happens to fill your Pokedex, which doesn't affect the fact that we still only get to catch the first Pokemon we find per route as per the Nuzlocke rules. There's just gonna be a little caught marker on them since we technically have them registered in the dex from the start of the game. As we pass through Cinder Volcano, Ivory captures Moltres, but luckily she's not the only one who picks up a fire legendary. Entei's a fantastic pickup, but you don't want to get attached to any of these Pokemon because expert mode is about to go expert mode all over my ass. To more exactly elaborate, the game has a multitude of multi-battles. What makes these fights so difficult is the fact that you're essentially fighting a double battle 1-on-2, since Jax is a completely useless partner. I'm not gonna lie, even with 2 legendaries, I didn't have the greatest selection of Pokemon for this fight. 4 out of the 6 opposing Pokemon are dark types, and you can basically count on getting burned. This made it an extremely unattractive idea to bring my best Pokemon Solgaleo. Instead, I relied on Grovyle to get rid of the speedy Krokorok as fast as possible, since with my luck, I'm pretty sure I'd get flinched every single time. Which is a pretty ironic statement to make just before getting an Ancient Power Omni boost. This is also where Jax ends up contributing the most, possibly throughout the entire story. By paralyzing Swoobat, we both outspeed it, which ends up being necessary to take it down before it gets to hit us. Because of the defense boost from Ancient Power, we're even able to stay alive long enough with Tyrantrum to face Hitmonchan Hitmonchan in a 2v1. While Hitmonchan goes for Fake Out to get more burn damage, Magnemite once again does something useful by going for Thunder Wave, allowing us to outspeed the next turn and deal massive damage with a Pixelate Stomp. Hitmonchan does get fully paralyzed, but we unfortunately fall victim to burn. With Entei still at full health and the only Pokemon left on the opposing team being a Shiftry, it's looking pretty good for us. I went into this fight thinking there was about an 80% chance that I lose and get sent back to the very start of the game. So considering the odds, I'm pretty happy just to make it through, even though we lost most of the Pokemon we brought to the fight. To get to Crater Town, we've got to move through Route 5, where we can of course get another encounter. And considering we're about to go up against a Dark-type gym, Hawlucha is a very welcome addition to the team. It even comes with Scrappy, making it better in every single way. Once we reach Crater Town, we get access to the Move Relearner, which gives our legendary Pokemon access to some extremely broken moves. Unfortunately, the opposition is about to get exponentially more challenging, so getting access to these fantastic moves is pretty much a survival necessity. From here on out, every fight in the game is nail-biting torture. We're looking at fully EV'd, near perfectly optimized Pokemon with great coverage. On top of that, every single gym fight has a gimmick that tends to benefit the gym leader and gives us a really hard time. In the case of the second gym leader, Special Agent Vega, unless your Pokemon is a Dark, Psychic, or Ghost type, you take 1/8 of your health at the end of every single turn. This damage adds up extremely quickly, especially since most of his Pokemon are equipped with Protect. To make matters worse, our only Pokemon that doesn't take damage from the gimmick is weak to Dark, his type of choice. His Spiritomb's only attacking move is Hex, making it an almost free matchup for Chatot. I say almost because Spiritomb can still damage us by burning us with Will-O-Wisp, which combined with the end of turn damage takes a pretty hefty chunk out of our HP at the end of every single turn. In fact, by the time I take Spiritomb down, Chatot only has 1 turn left to live. I could try and save Chatot as Vega sends in Liepard, but it wouldn't be able to contribute for the rest of the fight, and whatever Pokemon comes in would take a ton of damage. It's sad to have to let go of one of your favorite Pokemon, but you do what you gotta do when it comes down to survival. By dodging a Night Daze, Escavalier is able to take down Liepard without falling at the end of the turn to the gimmick. This brings out Mega Absol. That's right, we're facing fully EV-trained Mega Pokemon, and it's only the second gym. Nothing on my team takes 2 hits from Max Attack Mega Absol, so I've gotta make a sacrifice here. Conveniently, close combat does lower Mega Absol's defenses, making it a bit easier to deal with. I've also made sure to not give Solgaleo an item, so we take less damage from Knockoff before taking out Absol. At this point, we should be good to go. Honchkro's defenses are pitiful, so we can knock it out with a single Sunsteel Strike. Finally, we've got to deal with Eviolite Poniard, but with a quad-effective Wake-Up Slap, we knock it out in a single turn to claim our second gym badge. Okay, here's the situation. Our teammates are dropping like flies, and we can only pick up this Grimer in the KBT Expressway before the next major roadblock. We are able to evolve Tangela, but our team's still pretty ill-equipped for the situation. There's no way for us to progress past Crater Town without being teleported by Hoopa to Cinder Volcano and be ambushed by Team Shadow. The first fight versus Ivory isn't even that bad. It's the fact that it's a back-to-back fight where we've got to take on Zeph's Mega Houndoom right afterwards. Ivory's Volibee and Mischievous aren't much of a problem, but I can't say the same for her Psy-spamming Alakazam. As it sets up Psychic Terrain to boost the power of its expanding force, I'm able to take it down to its sash with Sacred Fire. The 50% chance for Sacred Fire to burn would have been really convenient there, since I can't Extreme Speed because of the Psychic Terrain. I have 2 options here: try and stall out Psychic Terrain by sacrificing Pokemon and then going for Extreme Speed, or risk a crit with Mufasa. But it's not really much of a choice. If I sacrifice that many Pokemon, I might as well restart the game. Without healing, our battered and bruised team must now go up against Zeph's Mega Houndoom. Thankfully, that's the only Pokemon he has. Unfortunately, that's kinda bad enough. Skitty at least gets an opportunity to be useful. You will not be missed and probably forgotten. Then I send out my Hawlucha, which is able to outspeed, but it's just not enough to take Houndoom out, so I end up falling to another Flamethrower. Kind of a big loss compared to Skitty, but at least Hawlucha won't be particularly useful versus the next Flying-type gym, and it at least left Houndoom low enough that Daddy can come in and pick up the pieces with an Extreme Speed. Our Pokemon are being taken out left and right like it's garbage day. And what, you think your subpar play has nothing to do with it? Get out of here, Stantler Boy, I'm doing my best, okay? The Mimikyu I find in Valley Cave seems to have its original ability. I guess you can't really have Mimikyu without its disguise. Once through the cave, we can pick up another encounter on Route 6, and Avalugg, being the defensive behemoth that it is a pretty great pickup considering we're about to fight a team full of flying types. Thankfully, we pass through quite a few more locations on our way to Blizzard City. Our first pickup is a Tentacruel with Corrosion from Route 7. As we make our way through Frost Cavern, I pick up a Crobat with Screen Cleaner, which basically just gets rid of screens as it swaps in. Finally, we pass through Route 8, which connects Frost Cavern to Blizzard City, where I pick up my final encounter before the gym, Battle Armor Manectric. As useful as it might seem to have a couple of electric types and an ice type for this fight, Alice's gym gimmick is the Delta Stream damage reduction to moves that are super effective against flying types. She also has Tailwind for flying types built into this gimmick, and on top of that, we can't ever get rid of Skarmory's Stealth Rocks. As much of a bummer as all this is, I at least get a free Sacred Fire as she goes for Stealth Rocks to burn Skarmory. The AI often decides to switch if it sees that you have a KO, which essentially gives me a free Sacred Fire against Dodrio, allowing me to knock it out with an extreme speed. Gliscor comes out next, and the randomizer helps us out quite a bit with this one. Normally, this thing activates its Poison Heal with a Toxic Orb, but because of the randomized abilities, it actually just poisons itself and will take damage since it's got a different ability. Switching to Avalugg causes Alice to swap out again, which conveniently gives me a couple of Icy Winds onto Pinsir before Avalugg sadly goes down to Poison. Mega Pinsir is an absolute monster, and at least it doesn't have Aerialate because of the randomizer. Mufasa is the only mon I have that stands a chance of taking a hit. Because of Stealth Rocks, I don't have Multiscale intact, which means I'm risking a crit. And without Avalugg speed drops, I'm pretty sure Mega Pinsir is just a wipe, Aerialate or not. Mufasa's left with so little HP that I don't even think we can swap in again because of Stealth Rocks. Once Gliscor comes back in, I send in Crobat to dodge an Earthquake, but the Stealth Rocks still deal 25% of our health. Being a flying type, we at least get the benefit of not taking super effective damage from Rock Tomb, giving us quite a few turns to deal damage with Cross Poison. The other major threat on Alice's team is her special attacking Crobat. As I switch to avoid losing my own Crobat, I end up losing Manectric. And with only 4 Pokemon left, effectively just 3 that I can actually swap in, I realize that if I let this Crobat set up, it's possible that it just sweeps my entire team. So instead of dealing as much damage as I could with a reduced damage Thunderbolt, I decide to go for a Nuzzle first to get Crobat paralyzed. This allows me to outspeed and get the extra damage with Thunderbolt the next turn anyway, while simultaneously ensuring that I'll be able to outspeed the next turn and not just get taken out by another Sludge Bomb before I get to move. Alice of course switches out and takes the Sacred Fire with Gliscor instead. At this range, I'm just barely able to survive Earthquake, so Gliscor opts for Toxic instead. After a Sacred Fire, this leaves Gliscor at low enough HP that it ironically falls to its own Toxic Orb. As Skarmory comes in, I know it'll outspeed me, but I can't exactly swap out because of Stealth Rocks. Thankfully, the burn we got the very first turn of the fight reduces its damage output enough that it barely makes a dent, and we're able to knock it out with a Flame Wheel. From here, Raichu's Nuzzle has paved the way to victory as we outspeed the paralyzed Crobat with our final PP of Sacred Fire to claim our 3rd gym badge. Every time I'm stripped of half of my team after a boss fight like this, I've got fewer resources for the next one. I'm trying my best to keep my strongest Pokemon alive, but it's not easy, and the challenges just keep coming. Once we reach Fallshore City, we're at least able to buy stat boosting and lowering items, which will at least allow us to tailor our EV spreads for what we need going forward. We're able to pick up some new exciting encounters like Sheer Force Metagross on Route 10. As we pass through Auntil Woods, steel types seem to be on the menu as we pick up Melmetal. Grass Pelt isn't a particularly useful ability for it, but I'll take this defensive behemoth even if it is slightly nerfed. Route 9 doesn't disappoint either with a Larvitar, which will only really be useful once it's fully evolved. But like I said earlier, I wouldn't get attached to any of them. Before we get to fight the next gym leader, we've got to deal with another Team Shadow multi-battle. This fight is almost a comical roadblock. The Grunt has a team of 3 Pokemon entirely focused on setting up psychic terrain. The only hope I actually had to get through this fight was, ironically, my unevolved Grimer. The least threatening Pokemon of the entire lineup is Oranguru, so I made sure to face it on the left and take out 2 of the 3 Pokemon on the right. Setting myself up in this position cost me both Metagross and Grimer, as well as Jax's entire team, which is a price I'm quite a bit more willing to pay. With Multiscale intact, I barely take any damage from a super effective Shadow Ball from Alakazam, and the left Grunt's Pokemon can only attack me with Expanding Force, which Mufasa resists. It's a close call, but at least there's no more Psy Spam for us to deal with. I keep losing Pokemon at close to the rate that I'm getting them, leaving me with a fainted box that's bigger than my actual active box. Luckily, we just got access to a ton of new areas to pick up a few new ones. First, we head east off of Fallshore, where I pick up a Feraligatr on Route 11. I then realize we're perfectly able to fish in Fallshore City itself, where I find a Tapu Lele. Definitely not as good without Psychic Surge, but I'll still take a Fairy Psychic type with a massive special attack stat. In Cliff Cave, I find what's probably our new most powerful Pokemon, a Golisopod with with Ice Rider's version of As 1. Fishing in Epitome Town gets me a dazzling Alolan Marowak, and I certainly can't complain about my encounter in Thunderclap Mountain being Marshadow, even though Hypercutter is way worse than Technician. The 4th Gym Leader Mel has a pretty interesting gimmick, since his normal types stand to gain the most from an inverse battle. This is an extremely confusing battle format where all resisted moves are super effective and vice versa. We also can't really use status effectively since his signature move is Facade. Thankfully, his Beware can't really do much to Tangrowth, and I'm able to get a lot of health back by spamming Giga Drain. Unintuitively, his Heliolisk of course deals super effective damage with electric type moves, so I swap out into my Tentacruel, who easily tanks it. Heliolisk can't really do anything to Tentacruel, so Mel swaps out into Miltank. Miltank hits almost all of our Pokemon on the team for super effective damage, except for Tangrowth, which is why it's so important that we got all that health back from Giga Drain. As it continues to boost its attack with Power Up Punch, I take the chance to knock off its Citrus Berry before it's able to activate it, which triggers Emergency Exit. Predictably, Mel swaps out into Heliolisk, so I send back in Jellybean, who gets paralyzed on the switch before I'm able to hit it with a Muddy Water. Once I see a KO, he swaps out again, and my Muddy Water unfortunately isn't quite enough to take Beware out. I can at least swap in my Grass type to resist the incoming Ice Punch, and unfortunately not get nearly as much HP as I want back after taking a Hammer Arm from the 1 HP it's got remaining when I use Giga Drain. Porygon Z hits literally every Pokemon on our team for super effective damage, so I just swap in my best special defender. After eating a round, we take a super effective Psybeam and manage to get a bit of health back with a Draining Kiss. A fighting type resists Psychic, so we can safely swap in Marshadow. During inverse battles, Ghost and Normal types hit each other for super effective damage, so we're able to outspeed Porygon Z and knock it out with a Shadow Punch, bringing out Lopunny. This is when the normal Ghost rule becomes kind of a problem for us, since Mega Lopunny is faster than Marshadow. In this format, there's nothing that resists normal, so I'm kind of forced into a corner where I've gotta sacrifice Jellybean. As usual, it's up to Daddy to clean things up. I've got to go for Sacred Fire to get as much damage as I can, but getting a burn would just power up its Facade. I try for the KO with E-Speed, but just barely fall short. Somehow, even a +1 Brick Break from Mega Lopunny isn't enough to take out Entei, I guess proving once and for all that it is the best legendary beast. I mean, okay, it definitely has been since all the way back when the 3rd Pokemon movie came out. Entei then continues its domination versus Miltank by getting a burn with Sacred Fire so that it doesn't lose to Body Slam. Burn even picks up the KO at the end of the turn, which leaves Mel with Heliolisk. Theoretically, we could go for total domination here and take out Heliolisk with an extreme speed, but the 30% risk to get fully paralyzed and losing Entei here would be absolutely devastating. Instead, I let Roach make a great first impression. As we return to Thunderclap Mountain, Marlin manages to capture the final legendary bird. In this fight, we're looking at Permanent Rain, making Zapdos' Stab Hurricane 100% accurate. Oh, yeah, I wasn't ready for it to be that easy. After forcing Marlin to release his useless Zapdos, we head to Ptarmigan Town. The only way we get an encounter here is by fishing, and we pick up Noibat. We do have a major showdown here versus Successor Maxima. And finally, after having my team gutted during every single boss fight since Gym 2, for the first time, it actually feels like I have an advantage, and I'm able to bring a counter to every single one of Maxima's Pokemon. Once we beat her, we collect our Mega Ring and make our way towards Dahara City. Before getting there, we've got to pass through Route 12, where I find a Slowbro with Competitive. Definitely not as good as the default Regenerator, but it's still a fantastic defensive Pokemon. As a person with sorted priorities, once I get to Dahara City, I of course head straight for the Game Corner. Here, we can trade our coins for some of the best items in the game, which will make fights a lot easier going forward. The Game Corner also has a selection of Pokemon available that's been fully randomized. My choices aren't exactly incredible, but I am able to get Spiritomb, and if Cynthia uses it, it's gotta be good, right? I then look forward to a solid week straight of gambling with my boy Jax, when suddenly Hoopa appears and has other plans for us. Look at this place, Jax. We had a full week of free margaritas. You just had to go on that vape break when you were on such a winning streak. My fault. I recall you wanting margaritas. To go get some Philly free fuck. Yeah, the Ruins of the Void isn't exactly a cool weekend trip. Now listen, I appreciate getting a Moxie Scissor as my encounter as much as the next guy, but this place is a Nuzlocker's nightmare with multiple back-to-back difficult battles versus juiced up legendaries with raid shields and boosted stats. The 3 legendary beasts beasts at least don't have rage shields like the fights right after them, and while they don't get their attack stats boosted, they get a boost to speed, making all of them faster than every single Pokemon we have. The first fight is versus Raikou, and it's the only one where I have a legitimate strategy that's somewhat respectable. I set up Light Screen with Tapu Lele after taking a ridiculous amount of damage from Thunderbolt. I then go for Protect every other turn to guarantee I get as much HP back from leftovers as possible, alternating it with Draining Kiss to get even more recovery. This way, I managed to get Raikou into the red just before my Light Screen runs out. This puts the Sabertooth at about 20%, which means it only takes 2 hits of its own Life Orb to knock itself out. So all we gotta do is swap between 2 Pokemon where we expect to be able to tank the hit, and Raikou will deal the last bit of damage to itself. It did cost our Pokemon a lot of HP, and that's HP that we don't get back between these fights. Naturally, this means I had to have a plan for each of the 3 dogs going into this fight. It's just that not all of my strategies are equally, let's say, honorable. Entei would be extremely easy to deal with using Mufasa if it didn't have Sacred Fire. Thankfully, Sacred Fire is a move that barely has any PP at only 5. So all we gotta do is swap around to bait it into going for Sacred Fire as we use Protect or swap back into a Pokemon that resists it, and in no time, Entei's stuck using moves that barely make a dent into Mufasa's multi-scale to the point where we just heal back up with leftovers to activate multi-scale again. At that point, it's pretty easy to simply drop Entei with a couple of Zen headbutts. Ironically, the final beast showdown versus Suicune is by far the easiest. Slowbro pretty much completely walls this thing as long as we make sure to go for Protect every other turn to once again get as much recovery back as possible. This allows us to then take about a quarter of Suicune's health off with a Psychic. We do have to be a bit careful though, and only attack when we're above a certain range of HP since Suicune does have Mirror Coat. Anytime we're too low to attack, we simply click Slack off to get back to full HP and allow us to once again spam Psychic to take out the doggo. But you see, the legendary beasts are just a warm-up before a much more threatening challenge. Having assembled all 3 of the legendary birds, Zeph essentially gives the power of Hoopa Unbound to Aklob. And with that power, Hoopa is able to summon much more dangerous Pokemon. Yeah, right after Gen 2's legendary trio, we've got to take on the box legends back to back. And these guys are a bit more juiced up with 4 raid shields that each block 1 attack fully. They also get their primary attack stat boosted by 1 stage and defense boosted by 2. That attack boost means I'm not even going to be doing a good job taking resisted hits with super defensive Pokemon like Melmetal. Obviously, fighting this thing honorably is not on the table, so just like versus Entei, we've got to resort to stall. The only problem being, there are a lot more moves to stall out. The most dangerous is Brave Bird, since it's got a full 15 PP and a ridiculous base power of 120. Melmetal's fantastic defense and the 1/8 of PP we get back every 2 turns still isn't enough to take all 15. One of the ways to get around basically half of those hits is to protect with Pokemon that bait Brave Bird before we switch out. This way, we'll only have to actually face tank about 7 or 8 of them. Even so, Melmetal plus leftovers still doesn't have enough health to do it. Melmetal gets taken into the red at about the same time that I fully stall Ho-Oh out of Earthquakes. My second best Pokemon to just take the hit is our starter Solgaleo, who without multiscale still takes about 50% from a resisted hit. Conveniently, my next Protect stalls Ho-Oh out of its final and 5th Sacred Fire. The bit of leftovers recovery also edges me back over half so that Morning Sun gets me back to full and reactivates multiscale. At this point, I can just spam Morning Sun to get back to full every single time and tank Brave Birds until Ho-Oh's only remaining move is Recover. Now that Ho-Oh doesn't have a way to damage me, I swap back into Crobat to get rid of all of its Rage Shields with Cross Poisons. The shields stop Ho-Oh from being affected by any status moves whatsoever, be they stat lowering or status inflicting. I could just stall Ho-Oh out of Recover at this point since it's a guaranteed victory, but it's exponentially faster to use Poison. The Lugia we fight right afterwards is thankfully a lot easier to deal with. Unlike Ho-Oh's 3 attacking moves, it only has 2 in Air Slash and Earthquake. Just like Ho-Oh, it's got a way to get health back with Roost, and the final move is Toxic to try and whittle us down with Poison before we can take it out. Conveniently, neither Crobat, which is fully immune to Earthquake, or our Steel types that we're going to use to resist the Air Slash are affected by Poison. Because Mufasa has such an easy time taking Air Slashes, we really only have to stall out the Earthquakes. Once all 10 Earthquakes are gone, our Lion is free to take out all of Lugia's 4 shields, which takes the same amount of time as for Lugia to burn its final Air Slashes, thus making it safe to bring back Crobat to finish the job with Poison. Unfortunately, Aklob doesn't appreciate our ingenuity and sends us to Cube Space. Wait a minute, what's that lady doing in Cube Space? Clearly, it's a pretty popular tourist destination since I find my estranged father, who, like in a fever dream, has teamed up with my worst enemy to mine crypto in Cube Space, and they just won't stop telling me about at it. The two of them are able to get me out of there under the condition that I help them out to take down Vega and Primal Groudon. Kind of a terrible deal since Primal Groudon is possibly the most unfair boss fight in all of Pokemon I've ever played, but being stuck in cube space forever sounds like an even worse deal. To say that I just barely beat Vega without any losses is the understatement of the year, since Cynthia would have gone down to burn the very same turn that I won. We do actually get to prepare for Primal Groudon though, which is pretty good since this fight is extremely unfair. In this fight, Marlon takes on Primal Groudon with my Pokemon. The only agency I have is getting to pick whether he swaps Pokemon or uses a move, but I don't get to pick what move he uses. Obviously, there's no guarantee that Marlon doesn't do something obnoxiously stupid. In fact, because I'm counting on him doing so given the chance, I'm going to limit his options a little bit. By going to the move deleter and getting rid of every single move except for one on each of our Pokemon, we effectively gain back all agency during the fight. Now, our good Pokemon are mostly comprised of steel types, so we're not exactly going to be able to out-damage this thing to win. The thing doesn't have any rage shields though, so we are free to outspeed and poison it with Crobat. Crobat will then immediately fall to a sun-boosted flamethrower or rock slide, but at least we guarantee victory. I suppose unless Groudon's ability is specifically randomized into Slow Start, which of course gets rid of Desolate Land so that Flamethrower doesn't KO Crobat, while simultaneously cutting its attack in half for the first 5 turns so that we also don't die to Rock Slide. You get a lucky break this time, Crobat, but at least we were never losing to this ridiculous fight. The one last thing we've got to do before we finally get to challenge the next gym is infiltrate the Shadow Base to try and team up with Zeph. What normally makes this fight difficult is dealing with Zeph's Mega Gengar since you can't switch out once it Mega Evolves due to Shadow Tag. In this case, we know Shadow Tag is going to be randomized into something else, but I also managed to sweep most of his team with my As-1 Golisopod. Mufasa's got to step in to take care of his Focus Sash Decidueye, and in the end, we managed to successfully team up with Zeph without losing any Pokemon. Now that we're finally back to Dahara City, we can take on Galavan, and as much as I immediately want to burn his Bronzong with my 2 Will-O-Whispers, I know he has an Escavalier in the back, and Entei can deal super effective damage into Bronzong that Galavan can completely get out of taking by swapping out into his Flashfire Escavalier, which we know since we already had one earlier in the run. This way, I can focus all my efforts on Golem and burn it before it gets to hit me with a Rock Slide, after which Cynthia sets up with Calm Mind, but honestly it would have been fine to just flinch. After protecting with both of my Pokemon for a turn just to get a little bit more burn damage, I want to focus all my attention on the right side of Galavan's team. While burned, his Golem doesn't really have anything to threaten me with, so as long as I keep it alive, the fight is essentially a 2v1.5. I say 1.5 since we still take a bit of chip damage every single turn, and always risk getting flinched since Golem is faster than a lot of my Pokemon. Escavalier almost takes out Cynthia with an Iron Head before I protect myself from another Rock Slide and put Escavalier to sleep before it gets to move. I then switch it out into Marshadow to resist the incoming Rock Slide and knock off Escavalier's Assault Vest before it unfortunately wakes up and deals massive damage with X-Scissor to Noodles. I get some more damage with Sucker Punch before once again putting Escavalier to sleep. Golem then hits Marshadow with a Fire Punch, so I protect Tangrowth the following turn as I knock out Escavalier with a Sucker Punch. Ampharos comes out next, which is the whole reason we want Ampharos here in the first place. I'm expecting it to knock out Tangrowth, so I go for an Ice Punch to take out over half of its health. I was kind of hoping for Dragon Pulse, but Ampharos then goes for Thunderbolt into Tapu Lele, and we see Fire Punch from Golem. Golem then unfortunately succumbs to its slow death by burn, which brings in Bronzong. To not get her destroyed by a Gyro Ball, I protect Tapu Lele and knock out Ampharos with a speedy Ice Punch. Bronzong just sets up Trick Room at the end of the turn, which is fine by me, and Galavan brings out his final Pokemon Lantern. We don't really care about being slower than these guys since this matchup is essentially checkmate. Neither of them can really do anything to Mufasa or Noodles, so we slowly but surely pick them off to claim our 5th gym badge. With our badge collected, we get to head east to the Great Desert, where I pick up a Piloswine. Soul Heart on a Mamoswine isn't exactly super useful, but maybe it could power up some crazy blizzards, who knows? The badge gets us access to Surf, and thus we're able to collect a ton of water encounters. The first is a fortress with stamina, which sounds like just about the most broken physical wall I can possibly think of. I next head to Route 13, where I pick up a Monferno, and I can't exactly say Intrepid Sword Infernape is something to complain about either. The nearby Route 14 isn't quite as exciting with a drought-dug trio. Now that we've collected our water encounters, I move through Gurren Town into Vival Woods. And let's just say I'm not fully as excited about this Furret with Hustle. They can't all be winners, I guess. As we reach Vival Town, it's time for our Team Shadow allies to assault the Light of Ruin base. And if Aklov would have chosen any other password but his own name, we may not even have gotten through his door. Because we managed to conquer Cube Space, this time he's gotta take care of us himself in a Pokemon battle. And this fight can be pretty dangerous with Hoopa Unbound's frankly ridiculous attack stats. We've got to do our best to not be on the receiving end of its hyperspace BS. He starts the fight with a Klefki holding Light Clay so that its Reflect and Light screen last for 8 turns each. I use those first 2 turns where it sets up screens and a third where it paralyzes me with Thunder Wave to set up 3 layers of spikes. After that, I'm expecting Aklov to switch out, so my best bet is to send an X-Wing to clear the screens before pivoting out into something else. However, his switch ends up being into Primarina, so I may as well stay in and go for the super effective Cross Poison. Because of its held Kebia Berry, there's a bit of risk to this, since I could get crit by an incoming Ice Beam. I end up taking the maximum non-crit roll and go down to just 1 HP. If I swapped into something like Infernape, Golisopod, or Entei to take the Ice Beam, I'd be able to take the hit a lot better, but I wouldn't have enough damage to knock it out before being taken out myself first. After protecting to get some leftovers, I've got to switch Crobat out so I don't get taken out by priority Aqua Jet. And here, Aklov kind of throws the game. Instead of just letting Primarina go, he switches in Hoopa, allowing me to heal up all the way to full and deal massive damage with Draining Kiss. I can't stay in since a super effective physical Hyperspace Fury would completely destroy Tapu Lele, so I switch into Boomer, who despite taking a ton of damage, gets its defense boosted by stamina. This in turn makes the next Hyperspace Fury deal a little bit less, getting me another stamina boost before I unfortunately get fully paralyzed. Getting fully paralyzed again here would mean I've got to start sacrificing Pokemon. But it's not like I've got access to a better strategy since my entire box gets 2-shot by this thing, meaning it's impossible to switch in. In the end, I don't get fully paralyzed twice in a row and can breathe a sigh of relief. I had a few other backup plans. For instance, if Hoopa was Aklov's last Pokemon, I could have swapped in Golisopod, who's always able to take 1 hit and then finish Hoopa off with a quad-effective First Impression. The reason it's only a backup plan is if I try to do it while Aklov is able to switch, he'd just swap out into any of his other 4 Pokemon, which all resist Bug. Without Hoopa, Aklov is left with only special attackers, meaning Tapu Lele pretty much has free reign to set up Calm Minds versus Togekiss. With my boosted special attack, I can then stay healthy with Draining Kiss, which gets me almost all the way back up to full as I face Mega Gardevoir. This thing is able to deal pretty good damage on the physical side with Psyshock, but Draining Kiss is so strong after a few Calm Minds that I'm able to make it past Gardevoir with most of my health intact and proceed to sweep the rest of Aklov's team. The guy seems pretty bummed about this and once again tries to banish me from existence, this time into the Distortion world. And the only way to get out of this place is to defeat its warden, Giratina. In this boss battle, we've got to take care of a level 53 Giratina with all of its stats boosted. Thankfully, even with a +1 boost to its speed, X-Wing is still able to outspeed and get it poisoned with Toxic before falling to a Thunderbolt. You were supposed to save us once versus Groudon, Crobat, and instead ended up saving us twice. Your efforts won't be forgotten, and we continue our adventure because of your sacrifice. Defeating Giratina opens up a portal that takes us back to close to Dahara Town in the Rift Cave. I never actually got my encounter here, and we pick up the very fitting counterpart to Giratina, Palkia. And Prism Armor isn't just amazingly flavorful for Palkia, it's incredibly powerful too. With the Light of Ruin under control for now, I head south towards Route 18 where I find a Gligar. Gliscor is one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, and with Fluffy, it's possibly even stronger than with Poison Heal. In Antisis City, we've got to take on the most respected man in the Boreas region's underbelly. Big Mo's gimmick is essentially Trick Room by weight, meaning heavy Pokemon move faster. He also doesn't have any Poison-type Pokemon or ways to get rid of entry hazards, so as he sets up his own Stealth Rocks, I make sure to get 2 layers of Toxic Spikes. Before I'm able to get up the second layer, he swaps in his Wailord, which is completely fine since it's got heavy-duty boots to dodge hazards anyway. To deal with this monstrous whale, I send in the Family Jewels, who's just barely able to survive long enough to win the matchup. After this, Mo does a bit of switching around between Snorlax and Pangoro depending on which Pokemon I send in, which doesn't achieve much except losing a lot of HP to poison. Boomer is so physically bulky that I can just stay in against Drain Punches and watch as Pangoro goes down to poison. Hariyama also gets poisoned as it switches in, which would normally be terrible, but because its ability has been randomized away from Guts, we can just swap around between different Pokemon to advantageously take hits until it goes down to poison as well. Slowbro ends up being the perfect counter for Mudsdale and takes it out with just a couple of Surfs. All this leaves Mo with is his super damaged Snorlax from swapping it around so much. It's just one turn away from going down to poison as soon as it comes in, so all I've got to do is switch something in that's guaranteed to survive a crunch and watch as it goes down to claim my 6th gym badge. We next make our way to Seaport City so that we can take a ferry to Polder Town. Hey, how'd you make it out of cube space? Once we reach Polder Town, we immediately take on the 7th gym leader, Tessie. To make it up Crystal Peak, we've got to get her gym badge to be able to rock climb, and this is the first gym where we can pretty heavily use the gym gimmick to our advantage. The way this gimmick works is that your Pokemon ends up being the type combination of your first 2 move slots. This way, we can not only create super typings to invalidate her entire team, but we don't have to waste time using something like Rapid Spin to get rid of Toxic Spikes, since our typing can make it so they don't matter whatsoever. I use the first 5 turns to set up 3 layers of Spikes and my 2 layers of Toxic Spikes. Then, because Toxapex uses Haze every other turn to reset my stamina that it activates when it goes for knockoff, I can switch in Atraxa for free. As a Flying Steel type, Atraxa is unaffected by the Toxic Spikes, and we can knock out Toxapex with a few Earthquakes. This brings out Kingdra, which immediately gets hurt by both Spikes and poisoned by Toxic Spikes. I switch in the Family Jewels, who I've conveniently turned into a Water Steel type to resist every single one of Kingdra's moves and simultaneously be unaffected by Toxic Spikes. All I've got to do is protect every other turn, and Kingdra falls soon thereafter. Once Seismitoad comes in, I bait Earthquake with my Steel typing so I can switch in my Flying type Gliscor to dodge an Earthquake. Essentially, this just gives me one more turn of poison ticking down before I swap into Boomer. After shrugging off the Liquidation, I go for Protect to rack up more poison damage and switch Atraxa into another Liquidation, which barely does anything because of Fluffy. Once Seismitoad goes down to poison, Tessie brings out Gyarados, for which she's forsaken its original flying typing in favor of Dragon, which causes it to be affected by the Toxic Spikes. As Gyarados Mega Evolves, it gains the ability Comatose, which is pretty ironic since it already got status before gaining the ability. I go for a first impression after Gyarados Dragon Dances, but because it's not a Dark type anymore, it's unfortunately not a KO. Thankfully, I only have to take the 1 hit, since I can just protect the following turn and watch as Gyarados goes down to poison. Armaldo comes out next, which is now a Water Bug type, meaning it gets affected by both Spikes and Toxic Spikes. To deal with it, I've taught Slowsis Body Press, turning it into a Water Fighting type, which makes it literally resist every single one of Armaldo's moves. This is an unwinnable matchup for Tessie since I'm able to slack off and gain all my health back, so she swaps out into her final Pokemon, Seaking. Unfortunately for her, Slowbro has this matchup completely locked down as well and is able to knock out the Seaking with a single Body Press, bringing back in Armaldo. Oops, looks like you forgot about the Spikes, Tessie. Thanks for the 7th gym badge. Before we can go collect our final badge, we've got to confront the Light of Ruin one last time, so I prepare by evolving Bruce into Noivern. Being an extremely fast dragon, and with Intimidate to top it off, this thing's gonna be immediately useful. Before we're even able to reach the peak, we've got to take on Zekrom and Reshiram in a double battle. These guys are made incredibly lethal by getting their primary attacking stat boosted as soon as we enter the fight. We're at least able to counteract this a little bit with Intimidate to reset Zekrom's attack to neutral. What makes this battle extra unfair is that Reshiram and Zekrom have 252 EVs to each of their stats, despite that being impossible for the player. This gives them total offense and defense, so I deal as much as I can with an Expert Belt boosted Dragon Pulse from Noivern, which only does just over half to Reshiram. Next, I bring out Tyranitar. Now, if both of the dragons attacked me, I'd be dead immediately. However, because Reshiram sees a KO against Mamoswine, and the AI doesn't understand that it can KO me after Zekrom attacks, I'm safe from being doubled into. This way, I can go for a Stone Edge to finish off Reshiram, making it a 2v1, and it thankfully connects. Seeing the damage from the previous turn, I know that I'm dead to a Fusion Bolt, so I Protect, which actually allows Vaporeon to hit Zekrom with an Ice Beam before I swap out into Boomer. Vaporeon impressively just barely survives a Fusion Bolt and goes down to a Dragon Claw the next turn. This allows me to get off a Body Press, which looks like it might not be a 2-hit KO, but after being hit by a Fusion Bolt triggering my stamina, I definitely have enough power to win us the fight. This gets us access to the summit, and while I'm not afraid at all of the double battle versus Aklov since he won't have access to Hoopa Unbound at that point, we've got to get past Hoopa Unbound before we can actually fight him. And in this fight, we face an Omni-boosted Hoopa Unbound with 252 EVs to each of its stats, just like Reshiram and Zekrom. To make matters worse, it spawns in a dragon-dancing Mega Rayquaza from a different dimension, which, if you defeat it, it just respawns the next turn. In case you're failing to put it together, we're in a bit of trouble. Now listen, I don't have a great counter for these guys, nor am I sure if you even really can. Hoopa has Protect, so I can't just immediately go for a Life Orb first impression to knock it out. Rayquaza doesn't see an immediate KO against Boomer or Daddy, so I get a free turn to set up Reflect and burn Rayquaza with Will-O-Wisp. The plan is to try and burn Hoopa as well, but it just goes for a double Protect, so I'm not able to with my Will-O-Wisp, and Boomer gets hit by a Dragon Ascent before setting up Iron Defense. This causes Rayquaza to switch up its targeting and Dragon Ascent into Daddy instead, which despite being at +1, barely does anything because of the burn and reflect. Hyperspace Hole still deals a ton of damage to Boomer and triggers its stamina. I'm then finally able to burn Hoopa with a wide lens boosted Will-O-Wisp, and Boomer takes it below half with a +4 body press. The next turn, Hoopa just protects as Rayquaza tries to Dragon Ascent Boomer. To conserve one of my most powerful Pokemon, I swap out into Furret, who actually survives. The next turn, Hoopa fails its Protect, so Daddy's able to hit it with an Extreme Speed, which isn't quite enough to take it out, so Furret misses Extreme Speed because of Hustle. Truly a god tier Pokemon, thank you for your contribution, Furret. Daddy's Extreme Speed at least did enough damage so that Hoopa falls to burn at the end of the turn. Rayquaza also has so many defense drops from those Dragon Ascents that we can just knock it out with an Extreme Speed for an, essentially deathless victory. With Hoopa sealed back into its, bound form, we've got to take on Aklov one last time. Except this fight is pretty much set up in our favor, since his Togedemaru really wants to attack Toucannon with super effective hit, allowing Marshadow to deal with Dragonite and Gardevoir before Mufasa and Metagross take care of the rest of Aklov's team. After that, we don't exactly have time for this maniac's toddler tantrum, since we've got a final gym badge to collect. Benjamin Button's final badge here barely has a gimmick, since it just turns your Pokemon into their unevolved forms if they're defeated. Turn 1, we trade entry hazards as he sets up his Sticky Web, and I get my Stealth Rocks up, which is much more useful since he's got a team full of bug types. Benji switches his Volcarona straight into my rocks, which takes away half of its health before I get to set up a layer of spikes and then swap out into Spike. Feraligatr takes some damage from Heat Wave before Volcarona gets a speed boost. Because of Sticky Web, I would have been slower anyway, so it really doesn't change much about my play. I go for an Aqua Jet, which unfortunately doesn't quite do enough damage to take Volcarona out, so I get taken out and turned into Croconaw. I continue fighting Larvesta and eventually defeat it as a Totodile. This brings in Drapion, and wanting a free switch, I just get as much damage as I can with Aqua Jet before letting Totodile go to a Night Slash. Pikachu comes out next, who always survives any attack because of Disguise, allowing me to fire off a wide lens boosted Will-O-Wisp. This causes Benji to swap to Fortress as I sadly go for a Protect. We then each do a bit of setup as I go for Will-O-Wisp and Benji sets up his Reflect. Come on, seriously? Because Fortress can't touch Boomer, I might as well set up a few more layers of spikes as it just goes down to burn. Benji of course isn't having any of it and instead swaps out to Araquanid, so I take the chance to send in Melmetal. Without Water Bubble, Araquanid really isn't a threat, and I'm able to set up to +6 with Iron Defense to completely wreck Benji's entire team with body presses. Being this close to the Pokemon League, we're not messing around anymore. We're getting there by any means necessary. And it's all coming together now that we've got our final gym badge. All we've got to do to reach the league is get through Victory Road, where we find one last encounter, Komodo. Ironically, the fact that it has the simple ability has nothing to do with the fact that I bring it to the final team. The level cap stops us from getting Clanglorious Soul, so we can't double our stat boost from that, which basically means it just acts as a negative and doubles our stat drops for moves like Close Combat and Clanging Scales. Alongside it, I of course have to bring my starter Mufasa. Bringing a Steel type really gives us an advantage versus Arabella, and Solgaleo is easily our best one. Next, I bring a couple of immunities, our only Flying type in Atraxa and our only Fairy type in Psycho. With both a Dragon and Ground Elite 4 member, I really felt like I needed them. To round out the team, I bring our strongest attackers, the Family Jewels and Boo. This is it. Once we enter the Elite Four, there's no turning back. As we face the first Elite Four member Arabella, it's truly Mufasa's time to shine. Just like the gym leaders, every Elite Four member has their own gimmick, which in this case is constant misty terrain and a boost to the lowest defense of whatever fairy type joins the battle. Her lead focus sash Rabombi wants to set up both screens and then Sticky Web, giving me 3 free turns to set up Cosmic Power to boost my defenses. In fact, it's essentially 4 free turns since she swaps out into Tapu Fini immediately after using those 3 moves, giving me a 4th Cosmic Power. Expecting Fini to taunt me, I go for a 5th Cosmic Power to boost my defenses even further. Now, no matter how high your defenses are, Nature's Madness always deals half of your HP just like Super Fang. Thankfully, this scales with your HP, and Tapu Fini really doesn't have any other good way to deal damage. So, as soon as Taunt wears off, I'm free to go for Morning Sun to gain most of my HP back. After being taunted again, Fini is able to get me down to about half HP before I knock it out with one final Sunsteel Strike. As Rabombi comes in, I know it's going to set up Reflect and Light Screen since it's got a Focus Sash. So I make sure to stall for 8 turns with Morning Sun and Cosmic Power even though I can't gain more defense before knocking Rabombi out. Because of Leftovers Recovery, this leaves me at full HP once Arabella sends out Mega Mawile. This means I've got Multiscale intact, so Mawile barely does anything even if it were to get a crit. Leftovers gets me back to Multiscale at the end of the turn, which is pretty good since Mawile actually gets a crit with the incoming Sucker Punch before I knock it out with an Iron Head. Besides Mega Mawile, there's basically nothing that can hurt me, and I pick off each of Arabella's fairies one by one with Iron Heads, ending the first Elite Four battle with full HP without even swapping one of my Pokemon. The second Elite Four member is Penny the Dragon Savant, and she loves dragons so much that her gimmick is giving them all Serene Grace. I lead the fight with Boo and Scaly, and make sure to use Ice Punch into Goodra so that Scaly can outspeed both of Penny's Pokemon and knock them out with a single clanging Scales. This brings out Penny's Komodo and Latias turn 2. I have Boo use an Expert Belted Spectral Thief to take out Latias before Scaly gets to attack. This makes it so clanging Scales doesn't do spread damage, meaning it does a lot more to Komodo, enough to take it out in one hit. In just 2 turns, we've taken out 4 out of Penny's 6 Pokemon, which brings out her final pair of Hydreigon and Mega Sceptile. I really can't afford to lose Marshadow for the next fight, even though I'm expecting Sceptile to spam Rock Slide to try and get those 60% flinches. Because of the major chance to flinch, this might be a little bit iffy, and it's possible that I'll have to do a lot of swapping around to get where I need to be. Expecting Sceptile to break Mufasa's Multiscale and then have Hydreigon take it out with a Dark Pulse, I swap in Scaly to resist both. And to my surprise, Psycho doesn't actually flinch and takes out Hydreigon with a quad effective Draining Kiss, getting all the way back to full HP in the process. Scaly could theoretically be targeted by a Dragon Pulse here, so I swap out into Mufasa, and unfortunately Psycho flinches. I protect Psycho the next turn and try for a Sunsteel Strike, which to my surprise after the Rock Slide actually connects but just barely fails to get the KO on Sceptile. Knowing another Rock Slide is coming, I swap to Atraxa and manage to land another Sunsteel Strike at the end of the turn for a super easy victory versus Penny. The most dangerous Elite Four member in my opinion is Moleman with his deadly vicious Sandstorm. In this case, the ability randomizer really helps us out since Excadrill doesn't have Sand Rush, so we can outspeed and burn it with a Will-O-Wisp. The Family Jewels then outspeeds Flygon and takes it out with a single quad effective Ice Beam. Finally, Excadrill ironically moves at the end of the turn and does a bit of damage with Earthquake. The vicious Sandstorm not only takes out 1/8 of our health every single turn, but it also boosts the special defense of all ground types just like regular Sandstorm does for Rock. Boo is in range of being taken out by an Iron Head plus Vicious Sandstorm here, so I make sure to go for a Drain Punch, which puts Sandslash in range of being taken out by an Ice Beam. This gives me a ton of HP back, and I'm able to knock out Sandslash before it moves. Excadrill just protects here, which is actually fantastic, since I don't mind it being kept alive in its burned state. This way, I can just immediately knock out Gliscor with an Ice Punch the next turn, and pick off Excadrill with an Aura Sphere before it even gets to attack. This just leaves Moleman with his least threatening Pokemon Quagsire, which does require me to swap around a bit since it keeps spamming Yawn, but eventually I'm able to knock it out and defeat the 3rd member of the Elite Four. The final member of the Elite Four is Elias the Zombie, and this is exactly why we brought Boo. We burn Mimikyu before it's able to set up with Swords Dance and start bulking up to boost our attack and defense before we steal Mimikyu's attack boost with a Spectral Thief. The poor thing tries to get a bit of damage in after we break its disguise, but the Shadow Sneak barely does anything now that we're at +4 defense. A second Spectral Thief takes Mimikyu out, which brings out Aegislash. Aegislash both has King Shield, and Elias's gimmick is that ghost types have double defenses at full HP, just like Multiscale. So I get rid of both of those problems by just going for Will-O-Wisp and then taking Aegislash out with another Spectral Thief. This brings out Trevenant, which sets up Rain with Drizzle before I knock it out in one hit with Spectral Thief. Grigus actually manages to survive because of the Shadow Veil, so I get hit by a Nightshade before finishing it off with a second Spectral Thief. Mega Banette comes in and hits me with a Sucker Punch that actually gets a crit. Just like X-Wing, Boo survives with 1 HP and takes out Banette in 1 Spectral Thief. Elias's final Pokemon is Blacephalon, which we can easily knock out for a total Elite Four domination. Through one of the worst early games I've ever been through, our random Pokemon have really made a comeback, and between close calls and more lost lives than I can count, we've made it to the deciding fight of the challenge. The champion of the Boreas region is of course Jax, who challenges us to a double battle. His lead Salamence is made a little bit less threatening by the fact that it doesn't have Aerialate once Mega evolved. Instead, the broken ability is replaced with Drizzle to set up the rain. What's perfect about Marshadow is it can't be faked out by Hitmontop because of its ghost typing. Unfortunately, Salamence's jolly nature makes it just barely faster than Boo despite having a lower base speed. Hitmontop then goes for Helping Hand as I protect Psycho from another Rock Slide. Oh come on, seriously? After being flinched twice, I swap Psycho out into Scaly to resist the incoming Helping Hand boosted Rock Slide, and as they say, the third time is in fact the charm as I connect with my quad effective Ice Punch to take out the Mega Salamence. Naganadel comes out next, so I swap Boo into Mufasa in case of a Sludge Bomb, and Scaly into Psycho, which dodges the Dragon Pulse. I then protect Psycho from the incoming Sludge Bomb to deal massive damage with a Sunsteel Strike, which almost takes Naganadel out. A close combat from Hitmontop barely does anything into my Multiscale, so it goes back to just using Helping Hand to power up a Heat Wave. This almost knocks out Mufasa as Atraxa dodges it while swapping in. Gliscor's flying typing also lets it avoid Mufasa's Earthquake, which finishes off the dragon and does a decent chunk to Hitmontop after the defense drop. As Jax sends in Pyroar, I double switch out into the Family Jewels and Scaly. Hitmontop boosts up the power of a Hyper Voice with Helping Hand, which does a pretty hefty chunk to both of my Pokemon. Since Scaly is at risk of being taken out by another Hyper Voice, I swap out into Psycho so that both of my Pokemon are able to survive, giving Family Jewels the chance to wash away every other Pokemon on the screen with a Surf. Sorry Psycho, you're just not as valuable as Komodo for Jax's final 2 Pokemon. The last pair of the challenge are Gastrodon and Magnezone, so I send back in Gliscor. I try to sneak in a KO before going down, but an Aurasphere just barely doesn't do the job. My misfortune continues as Gliscor fails to land a Power Whip before the Family Jewels get taken out by a Thunderbolt. Gliscor ends up surviving Muddy Water, but gets its accuracy lowered, and Power Whip is already pretty shaky. Scaly comes in and knocks out Magnezone with Clanging Scales, meaning Gastrodon is the only thing standing between us and absolute victory. Of course it's got a Rindo Berry so it's able to survive my Power Whip that I actually somehow managed to land, giving Jax the chance to increase my death count by 1 before I send in the very first Pokemon we got. And so, with one final Sunsteel Strike, Gastrodon falls and Jax is defeated, meaning I just beat a Pokemon Unbound Randomizer Hardcore Nuzlocke. The early game for this challenge was absolutely brutal, but I feel like we kinda got the snowball rolling towards the end. I love randomizers and it was great fun to use a lot of these Pokemon that I've never ever used. And I got some great ideas, but let me know which game you want to see me randomize next. And until then, you wanna be the most subscribed like no one ever was.